So I'm really delighted today to welcome Holly Niles, who's a licensed clinical nutritionist, and she specialises in functional and integrative medicine. And she's here today to talk to us all things food. So food being one of my even star, 5-star wellbeing aspects that I really love people to consider when they're trying to improve something in their well-being. And it doesn't really matter what it is. Food is the energy that we put into our own bodies and is so important. So I'm rapt to have Holly with us here today. So Holly, I'd love it if you could introduce yourself and just maybe say a little bit about what you specialize in your practice, and anything else you'd like to tell us.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm a girl who kind of always had a passion for integrative medicine, even as a teenager. So it was a long journey that was rooted in my teenage years of how I got to be a nutritionist. In addition to being a nutritionist, I'm also a yoga teacher and certified in food and spirit and yoga. And part of that, of course, you could say, well, I'm a girl who loves training programs. I love to learn. But I think what it really speaks to is we're pretty complex as human beings. And I think when we really are working to create wellness, we need tools. We need several tools in our toolbox. So while my approach is certainly as a nutritionist has a foundation of food, we're also working with these other tools to really invite the body to come back into wellness. I see clients with all kinds of imbalances, but I definitely see quite a few who are working with digestive issues. I think that's pretty worldwide, that whether they're having, reactions or bloating or, a history of upper GI or lower GI, there seems to be a lot of that. So I've worked quite a bit with that. And even in that context of something we're thinking GI, we still always kind of, as we think in functional medicine, we're always looking at the big picture. So even when we're thinking something specific as a body system like the digestive system, we still have to look at, are you moving your body? Are you stressed? Like, what are these other components to really help the body rebalance? So.
Yeah, so very complementary with what I'm always harping on to people about, all the different things they need to consider. So as we discussed before we were started recording, you were explaining that as a clinical nutritionist, you're in your state of Florida in the US. That means that you are licensed to give people information and help them make good food choices. So can you just, for people who don't really understand what a clinical nutritionist is, and I know in Australia within the medical system, like a doctor, a GP would refer someone probably to a dietitian, and dietitians are the ones that work in hospitals. So just maybe if you can just tell us a little bit about what a clinical nutritionist does.
Yes, well, it's similar, I would say, in the States, that a dietitian is that training that is geared more towards a hospital and nursing home. And I think those of us who have an interest in food, we can say that sometimes it's a little shocking what they feed people in hospitals and nursing homes.
Yes.
So it follows a very set, usually government instituted, protocol around calories. It's really a caloric macronutrient focus. So it kind of doesn't matter what the calories are as long as you meet these minimum daily requirements. That's sort of a standard dietitian path. A clinical nutritionist depends on the state, but the state that I live in, you have to have a master's degree in nutrition. So from that, that takes you sort of beyond simply looking at, here's the diet. Are you plant-based? Are you paleo? It's really looking deeper at biochemistry and, physiology and pathophysiology and, really having an understanding of how the body works, because food is really powerful, but we have to be wise in how we make food recommendations. So from my state, what I had to do was pass a national certifying exam that gave me a designation of a certified nutrition specialist. And then that allowed me to become licensed in this state. So that means that I am authorized by the state to give nutrition advice. So if you come to me with a medical condition, I am authorized to say, okay, I can therapeutically support you through nutrition.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Which is something that probably everybody should do more of, I think. Okay, so I wanted to tie my questions in to Holly with the other 4 systems that I work with as well as food. So let's delve a little bit into the relationship between food and movement. And if you can talk a little bit about how the foods we eat affect, especially the way we're motivated to move or not motivated to move, and able to move. A lot of people that I deal with, I guess, will have certainly that lack of motivation, but also, maybe generalized aches and pains and things like that. Just, I guess, any information that you would have to help us all be more motivated and able to move our bodies more regularly.
Yes, well, it's kind of a paradox. Sometimes people say, I know I need to exercise, I need to move my body, but I'm too tired to move my body. But I think if I moved my body, maybe I wouldn't be as tired. So there is a little bit of a dog chasing its tail there. We have to sort of think in many ways, there's some basics with nutrition that are just kind of logical. So, the story I always tell is nobody ever eats a banana split and says, you know what, I feel so amazing right now. I'm going to go for a run. That's what I'm going to do, right? Instead, we've taken in a lot of calories. We have a lot of sugar. And basically, you kind of become like Jabba the Hutt from the Star Wars movie. In that moment, your body's just like sitting there saying, all right, let me shut everything down because, wow, do I have a lot of sugar to process now? And that's a priority. And that's where we get that low-gi heavy feeling. And then in reverse, I think when somebody begins to eat well and balanced, so, thinking about minimizing those simple sugars, those kinds of foods that metabolize really quickly, that give you that quick high. But when we work, the body really loves what we call homeostasis, which is this beautiful balance. And so when we take in, like a banana split, we get into a hyper state where the blood sugar is really high and the body's just trying to get rid of that sugar. And to protect us, in a way, it kind of overshoots. It tries to wipe it all out. And then we have that crash where we feel like, oh my gosh, somebody drained my blood. I really have no energy. So we see a lot of those polarities, and we could take a micro version of that and say for your average person, the same thing applies. So if I'm starting my day and I'm having, the latte with the syrups in it and maybe like, a bagel or some sort of a pastry, now I've kind of taken my body on a ride. I'm going to be crashed. If maybe I'm skipping lunch, maybe I'm grabbing, a snack or something in the afternoon. Basically, you've asked your body to run all day and you've given it no fuel. You've given it food that it's basically just had to manage and react to, versus starting your day with perhaps, some kind of a protein source, a lower sugar, whole food. You did that, maybe 4 hours later, you had, a piece of fish, some veggies. Now there's been no ride for the body, right? Energy is even. And so let's assume we're trying to exercise as our day closes. We've actually got some reserve there because what we've fed the body has kind of helped that engine run smoothly. And I think that's probably one of the biggest pieces, to the puzzle, is sort of how you want to think. Like nobody, I've had this analogy, if you know anybody who drives a fancy car, like a Mercedes or something, if you said to them, listen, just put vegetable oil in the tank. It's so much cheaper. Why are you going to put that high test fuel in? They would just be like, what? This is a beautiful engine. Like, I can't possibly do that. But that's exactly what we do to our body. We want our body to run beautiful like a Mercedes, but many times we're giving it this really poor quality fuel that really doesn't prime or keep our engine running smoothly. So I think that's probably how I always like to think of it when we think of how we feed for movement.
Yeah, that's great. And so you mentioned, that's kind of keeping that homeostasis going all day, and then assuming that we want to exercise, in the evening. What would you say if somebody, their ideal is to get up and exercise first thing? Is your recommendation that they should have some fuel in the tank before they do that, or is it okay to just get up and do your exercise without eating anything first?
Well, that's where we probably come into the category a little bit of personal nutrition. So some people wake up in the morning and they are ravenous, like they just feel like they have got to eat before they can function. And then we have other people say, I feel pretty good. I could wait a few hours. So I think depending on the workout, so some people do well if they have something small, maybe a handful of nuts, or if they're doing something more aerobic, maybe like a small piece of fruit, which will give them some glucose that they can use right up while they're running that will actually fuel that. It's generally not ideal to eat a big meal before you exercise. That I think you just want to kind of feel for yourself, how you are in the morning, and, maybe you can go with a little snack. Maybe you need something a little bit more with a little protein to give you that fuel. So I think you want to just kind of tune in to how your body functions in the morning.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. And from what you said, just to summarize then, if people are struggling with having the motivation to move, it's really about keeping their fuel intake even and regular with the whole food choices that we ideally all want to be making more of. So making sure they're getting protein, making sure they're getting kind of slow release carbohydrates. And I would assume a little bit of fat and oil as well. Yeah. So that's all. Is there anything else you'd say about, I guess, the macronutrient combinations that are required for the motivation and the energy to move?
Yes. Because I think what we learn about all of it is that how you start the day will be a huge impact to your ability to make things happen as you move through the day. So it's like if you get in the ditch right out of the day, you spend some time getting your body level again, then you're probably not going to have that motivation. But I think, and playing around with that, fat has more than twice the energy of the other macronutrients. So sometimes people, finishing off, like putting some avocado or something with maybe they're having, broccoli or legumes or something. Sometimes they'll find just that perfect balance. And you generally know when you've got sort of that sweet spot when you feel satiated at the meal, not stuffed, but satiated. And you feel pretty even for maybe 2 or 3 hours. You feel like you're steady. I think that's a good measure to get a sense. And if you start to feel really hungry, like an hour later, then maybe you want to tweak some of those macros, to say, oh, maybe I needed a little more fat, or did I not have enough complex carbohydrate, or, maybe I had no protein. Sometimes that's a good way to measure.
Yep. Okay. And so what's your opinion on intermittent fasting?
So that I think there's a lot of science behind it, right? We've learned we can even, I always like when we have a trend, which it's a trend right now, I always like to try to go back and go, well, where in our ancient history have we seen this? Like, is this kind of something ancestors? And we know that certainly many religious traditions have some sort of fasting component to it. So there's a lot of research to suggest that having a time period without eating is beneficial. What we all seem to agree on is 12 hours is a really great, sort of, let's say that's a foundational piece, 12 hours without eating. Then we want to play with the idea of extending that, right? So that's where, again, we want to look at personalized nutrition. What exactly is someone managing in their life if they've just recovered from being really ill and they have 3 little children at home and they're working full time? Maybe we want to be a little more careful with how we do something like intermittent fasting because their fuel needs might be more. But I usually recommend clients start to just extend it. So if you feel like 12 hours is really comfortable for you, what happens if you go 14?
Yeah.
How does that feel? And so that's how I usually work with it. Some people do amazing on it. Some people can go longer. They can take it up to a 16-hour window of not eating. So it's a tool I use and I find it beneficial for many clients, but I haven't found it to be a universal tool. I think you want to kind of get into who you are.
Yeah. And sorry.
I was just going to say, and don't feel like you're a failure if you can't do intermittent fasting. I've had clients come like, I don't know what's the matter with me. So you got to listen to your body, and sometimes we have to rebalance the body before we can challenge it. So,
yeah. And I have heard a few times recently that it's often not the best thing for women until they're they've passed menopause or, they're getting to that point. So when they're still really in their fertile years, it can be a lot more difficult for them to use it beneficially.
Yeah, and if you look at one of the leaders in that field is a Dr. Walter Longo. He wrote The Longevity Diet. I heard him speak about 1.5 years ago, and he is not a fan of people doing it 7 days a week forever and always, because he says, and I think there's some good science that you're kind of setting a new set point for the body where you're slowing metabolism down, that there's something about these segmented times where we restrict and then we go to normal. So I'll sometimes have that piece. So, maybe 2 days a week or 3 days a week, make that window longer. And then maybe the other days go for the 12-hour.
Yep.
So it's often the change that initiates a metabolic sort of burst.
Yep.
Because we want, the body has a great ability to accommodate us. So it's that, the body going like, okay, now I have calories. Good, let's burn them. Oh, now I don't. All right, let me sort of conserve. So I think that's another piece of that puzzle is don't just become an intermittent faster 24/7, 12 months a year. That's what you do. That's probably not ideal either.
Oh, that's good to hear because that's what I do. I do it a few days a week. I'll try and do, 14 to 16 hours. So good. Yay, I'm doing the right thing. Okay, so let's move on to sleep. And I'm sure you're going to say, well, it's that same thing of maintaining homeostasis that's going to help you to then have during the day, that then at night you're going to have a good sleep. What else would you say about what we feed ourselves, what we nourish ourselves with, and how that affects our sleep?
Yeah, and sleep is a big commodity. And boy, if you're not sleeping, you would pay money if somebody could help you sleep. So again, we sometimes have to look at the individual, but some general rules, first of all, is it's probably not ideal to be eating, to giving yourself at least a 3-hour window between your last meal and when you go to bed. Mm-hmm. And that's just, the body will prioritize the metabolism of that food. And if it's doing that, which is an immediate job, it is not going to do housekeeping. It is not going to go into those states of repair. So we want to get the food through so that when you're sleeping, it's almost like you don't want the body to interrupt your sleep while it's processing the food. I think that might be a deeper way to say that. So that's a piece of it. And that is hard for a lot of people because lots of people have really busy days. They're unwinding at night, watching TV, and that's where they start snacking and maybe eating high sugar foods. So, I often start people with a 2-hour window. Can we cut it off 2 hours before bed as a starting point? That's key. Not having a lot of sugar late in the day, caffeine late in the day, like super spicy foods, heavy foods, huge dinners, probably not ideal for all those same reasons, right? We want the body to have this clear ability to kind of focus on sleep without having to digest. There are definitely some foods, foods that are high in melatonin, tryptophan, tart cherry is a food we think of that's high in melatonin. Some people think a little tart cherry juice maybe in your water. Certainly nuts and seeds fall into that category, legumes. And we also sort of think of the tryptophan foods. Tryptophan becomes serotonin, becomes melatonin. So poultry, again, legumes, certain grains. So there are foods. What I find works for many people from a dinner perspective is to have a little bit of starch with their meal, like maybe a grain or, a starchy veg. The low starch veg, their fat and their protein at dinner, that seems to provide a satiety and a combination that often will let people, go that time without eating before sleep. Now, let me say this, if you're somebody who goes like, I have to have something like how do I make my best choice? Then I would lean more towards maybe a handful of nuts could be a good idea, probably something with a little protein. What you don't want to do late at night is sugar or things, even a lot of dried fruit, things that are going to drive your blood sugar at night. That is not going to be conducive to sleep. So.
Oh, that's great. I didn't know that about those particular types of foods with the melatonin and tryptophan. A lot of people that I deal with as well, the key problem for them with sleep is not so much falling asleep, but it's the waking up in the middle of the night and then not being able to get back to sleep. So is there any advice you'd have around that other than what you've already told us?
Well, that's where we kind of have to go a little broader in our toolbox, right? So this is my experience with thousands of patients and clients. I think that people who are, especially really busy people who are just managing their day and, there's this and I got to run here and I've got kids and meetings and there's so much momentum in their day that I always feel like when the physical body starts to relax, it's almost like the nervous system goes like, wait, you weren't paying attention to me all day long. And that's where that busy mind will sometimes pop in. It's like you've gone to sleep and then it's like you wake up and it's often this mental gymnastics that are happening at that point. So again, I think this idea of creating, we talked about this a little bit before. So meditation, relaxation, breathing, getting the nervous system calm down before the physical body actually drops into sleep. I think that combination I've seen be helpful for people with that waking up and with that sort of as if all of a sudden, they had a cup of coffee or something. They feel very buzzy and, many thoughts and things. So I think often working those together can be helpful.
Okay, that's great. So everybody that I've said that you need to start meditating, it's not just me. All right. So, and then the other thing that is a huge issue for my clients is finding that, and it's probably again that, like you've already told us, maintaining homeostasis during the day, but it's really about how food interacts with mood that and maybe of course there's going to be multiple things behind what your mood is at the time, but people, especially women, saying, you know, they kind of get to the end of the day and they're tired and grumpy basically, and find their fuse is very short. You know, they're snapping at their kids or their partner or whatever, and yeah, just that general exhaustion at the end of the day. Any other tips on how nutrition can help with managing mood as well?
Well, to your point, a lot of what we said, like don't get in the ditch, don't let your body get a deficit. And I see this a lot with moms. I'm going to defy you to look in any mom's bag when she has her kids. There are going to be multiple snacks in that bag for kids, because everyone knows kids get hungry, they get grumpy, and we have problems. It's kind of the same thing for adults, right? So sometimes moms are so busy taking care of everyone that they get over hungry. And that is a blood sugar crash. And that's the body kind of putting out an alarm. And the reason you feel like, oh, that frustration is, in a sense, your body's in a mini emergency because blood sugar's low, the fuel is down. So I think kind of planning as you plan your day, you know, simple things. It doesn't have to be an involved meal, but we talked about nuts and seeds are a great, easy way to keep things, you know, going. Maybe it's like leftover, you know, chicken or some little snack. Maybe it's a piece of cheese. If you're a dairy eater, something just to not allow you to get to that really low point, I think is really important.
Mm. If somebody didn't eat nuts, you know, maybe had a nut allergy and also didn't eat dairy, what would your go-to be for them to have, like as a snack they can keep in their bag for themselves?
Well, sometimes depending on, you know, where you live, sometimes there's some bars they make. You can make your own. You can do some, you know, I have sometimes my clients make these really simple energy snacks. We use a little collagen protein and some coconut oil and, you know, things like that, cinnamon or cocoa. I think that, you know, depending if you've got the ability to actually have like a little cooler, certainly, you know, hummus and I think bean spreads are probably one of the easiest things with, you know, some veggies. That can be a great way to do it. And sometimes if people can't do nuts, many people can do seeds instead. So, and that's where the seed butters, you know, come in handy, you know, a sunflower seed, a pumpkin seed butter, hemp seed butter.
Yeah.
And, you know, listen, when you're a grown up, you know, when you're a kid, your mom is always like, don't eat out of the jar, right? You're never supposed to put your spoon in and eat out of the jar. But when you're a grown up, you can do that. And so sometimes it might be just taking a tablespoon or two of nut or seed butter and put them in your mouth. Like it could be that simple just to, you know, keep your fuel up, you know,
Yeah.
so that you're not feeling that.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, thank you. And then emotional eating is another big thing as well. And yeah, I guess that can happen at any time of day, but I would suspect that it happens mainly in the evenings. And again, you've talked about that already, of, you know, trying to avoid especially things like sugar in the evening. What do you tell people to help them with emotional eating on top of everything that we've already spoken about? If anything, maybe you've covered it all.
Well, you know, the first thing is don't get hungry. Hungry is a really bad decision maker, right? So I think that's like a 101, and particularly if you have a tendency, like know yourself, like don't set yourself up. But, you know, sometimes I play around with clients. It's like, what's eating you drives what you're eating, you know? So it's like, what's eating you? And, you know, I had a client who had like a really difficult boss that she really didn't respect. And she would hold it in all day because she couldn't say to him, I really don't think you know what you're doing. And so she would get in her car, she'd get home and she'd just like be eating like crackers or cookies, like out of this frustration. And so sometimes if you can just pause for a moment and say, what is happening right now for me? What is up for me? Now, she used to theoretically talk to him on the way home in the car. a little bit without an editor, like, I can't believe you would have asked me to do that. She just to get the emotion out, to get the frustration out so she would feel more clear. I think sometimes journaling can be helpful. It's a process. I'm not going to say everybody when they're reaching for a chocolate chip cookie is going to go, wait, let me journal. That doesn't always happen. But even if you can stop for 5 minutes and say, what is happening right now with me? What is really the cause of this? And it's generally an unspoken frustration, agitation, some place where you feel like you can't speak out and you swallow it with your food. And so that's not an easy journey, but it's something you can begin to work with. Even if you notice, like, actually what's happening right now is I'm really mad at X because they didn't do this. You might still eat it, but just starting to pause and get that awareness, I think, is one of the best first steps to get a harness on emotional eating.
Yeah, I think that's so beautiful, and I totally agree. I was doing a little recording for a course I'm running at the moment, and the same thing had come up about, eating sugary things, especially when we're feeling difficult emotion. And I'd said exactly the same thing. Number one, try and delay eating that thing. Just take the time to pause, put it off. And hopefully, as you said, you can start to think about, well, what's actually going on. And then the other thing I always say to people is, sure, if you want to have a cookie or some cake or whatever, do that, but you have to make it from scratch. And so at least, even if they've already made it and it's sitting on the bench, they know what's in it. It's, not got all the nasties that a store-bought product might have, and is just generally hopefully going to provide them some nutrition as well as some sugar when you've made it from scratch at home.
Well, and honestly, we could talk about this for an hour in itself, right? And I think it's kind of a soul task in a certain way too. It's really that getting a sense, because usually when you're emotional eating, you're mad or reactive to someone else, but you're actually punishing your own body for that, the frustration. That's not going to hurt them at all. And so that's where I think, I'll just say that's just an opportunity, and for all of us, right, is to really step in and be like, wait a minute, this actually is not going to affect them. I'm the one who's going to be affected. And so it's, an opportunity, I think, to take better care.
Yeah, beautifully said. Anyway, that also does lead me into my next area, which I like to call surroundings. And I like people to really think about all the toxins that are around us in our modern world, in the air we breathe, in the things we put on our bodies in terms of skincare products, and unfortunately also in the things that we put in our bodies from food. So I do like to try and steer people towards thinking about this, at least, reading ingredients, and considering that there are some foods in particular that they might want to start buying in the organic format if they can, if that's available to them. What do you say around this? Is that something you bring into your practice as well?
Yes, I think it's, a lot of people are doing a lot of these detox programs, right? We see a lot of them online, like, oh, I did this major detox. I did this major detox where I took all these, supplements, and the most fundamental part of detox is don't bring junk in. It's that simple. The less you bring in, the less you have to go through these, periodic detoxes. So I think the cleaner your food is, the closer to nature, the closer to your own home, that we in the States, we have something called the Environmental Working Group, which issues this list. I'm imagining you have something like that as well, where it gives you this list of, like, they call them the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. And so it's a similar idea. So where I think that's beneficial is, listen, not everyone has the budget to have every single thing be organic. So I like that as a way of saying, where does it really count? Like, where do I put my resources, and where maybe doesn't it matter? Find a local farmer's market, somebody near you who grows things, I think is one of, and just ask them. You've got the farmer in front of you. What do you do? How do you grow this? I think now there's a big movement to grow your own. Can you get pots? Just, make a simple little garden in your backyard, or, some big pots. I think all of those things are important. There's a pretty famous nutritionist in the States. Her name is Marion Nestle. And she had what she called the rule of 5, which says, if you pick up a food and it has more than 5 ingredients, put it back on the shelf. Then you're probably into processed kinds of things. So I think for me, it's always the simpler the label. If you have things you don't know what they are on the label, put it back. Our body has a beautiful software, and it's programmed. Like when you eat a carrot, it's a match. It knows exactly what to do with that carrot. When you eat a polysorbate, blah, 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 Splenda, some chemical, body doesn't have a choice. You put it in, it's got to manage it, but it really manages it. It doesn't use it. And so that's how I always like to think of that. Like, what are these foods? What is the message of those foods? Does my body software know what to do with it, or is it going to create a problem? So that's kind of always my simplest view to start with.
Yeah, that's great. And I like to say to people, well, think about, would your parents or grandparents, depending on how old they are, recognize this as a food? Because, this is how we've evolved, exactly what you're saying, that our body knows how to process and use and assimilate whole foods, but it doesn't know how to do that with things that it's not meant to ingest. Especially preservatives is a big bugbear of mine. They're there to make the food last longer. Well, what's that going to do in your body? Nothing good. And the EWG, we don't have the equivalent, but I always refer people to that. Our farming practices are similar. They're not quite the same, but I just think it's a good reference point. That's what I do in my home as well. I'll definitely, the Dirty Dozen foods is what I will always ensure that I buy the organic versions of. So it's a really good starting point. And I love that rule of 5. That's such a good tip for people. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Okay, well, I think that's pretty much all the questions I wanted to cover with you, Holly. Is there anything else that you wanted to say, or any other little tips that you'd give to people around helping them improve their well-being through food?
Well, the thing that I always like to think about is, in my training in functional medicine, we have really a pretty simple and profound belief in that the body knows how to heal itself. It's amazing how the body can heal itself. And so I think if we come from that place where we begin to kind of make our decisions in terms of, how can I feed my body so that it becomes vibrant and healthy, like the things that I'm ingesting, how is that likely going to translate into how my body feels, not only now, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And that's what we really see, is we're kind of like, making that investment. In the States, I lived in Canada, everybody has their retirement plan, right? In the States, we call them 401k, and Canada has its own name, but we always think about investing for when we retire. We think that's smart, right? So when we retire, we're going to have money. But then do we actually also think about investing in our body, so we've got a really good body, so that when we're retired and have our money, we can actually live a really good life? So I think that's how I like to think of it, is like, how are you investing in your body as well as maybe with your finances or your future? So
I love that. That is such a great way to end. It's so important. And no matter how young you are, you need to start now making that investment, because it's only going to be harder to regain any benefits if you start in your young years not doing the right thing by your body. So start now, and you will reap the benefits, yes, when you have more time to do exactly what you want to be doing. So, Holly, I really, really appreciate your time today. Before I let you go, can you just let everybody know how they can get in touch with you? And I'm assuming that you do work virtually as well, given that the bulk of the people that I reach are on the other side of the world from you. But is it possible for them to still work with you if they were interested in doing that?
Absolutely. I actually have had patients from all over. So the best way to reach me is through my website, which is very easy. It's my name, www.hollyniles.com. And there's a little contact, form that you can fill out there just to say that you're interested. I'm long before we had a virus, I was working virtual with a lot of my clients because I get referrals from different places. So that's a pretty easy format for me to do. So that would be lovely. Always love to meet new people and from new places. So it'd be my pleasure to work with anyone.
We'll have to see if we can get anybody who has been to Taronga Zoo multiple times, unlike me, for you.
That's right, because I love the Taronga Zoo.
And are you on social media as well? You're on Facebook, aren't you?
I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. On Facebook, it's Holly Niles with my credentials, MS, CNS, LDN. And on Instagram, it's Holly Niles.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty easy to find. Yeah.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for your time, and really appreciate all the great information that you've given everybody.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.